Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Due North, where we are trying to navigate life and theology with the compass of God's Word. I'm Ben Blakey, and I'm joined today by Pastors Stephen Duwe and Johnny Broadworth here from Compass Bible Church. And one thing about all three of us, when we're not doing ministry, one thing I know all three of us enjoy is sports. Even you two specifically, you grew up in Seattle, you grew up in Denver. There's a great affection for your hometown teams. I'm a little more all over the map. But we all enjoy when we get a chance watching some of our favorite teams or watching sports. And if anybody out there has watched any sports, especially over the last year, you're starting to see a lot more of something that you didn't used to see before. You'll see odds on the screen. You'll see even advertisements from DraftKings or other institutions where they're inviting you to wager on the sporting event. And so we want to ask the question today, should Christians bet on sports? And obviously that connects to a broader idea of, should Christians engage in gambling? And Pastor Johnny, I bet people are going to be real surprised at our answer. Are we encouraging people to bet on sports or gamble?
No, absolutely not. And the over-under on that, I don't even know how that works.
Yeah, so this is something we are going to try to make the argument why you should not participate in these things. And just one point of clarification as we get into this, some good categories to think about this would be, the sports betting that you see on TV, more institutionalized gambling. We're not talking about anything that friends might just do at a small level as they're enjoying something together. And even that, though, I would say be careful with. And
Right.
I personally don't love the argument when people are like, well, let's put some money on it to make it interesting. If I'm competing against other people, I want to beat them. It's interesting to me.
It's because you got that dog in you.
Right. The idea we need extra incentive, I think may be flawed, but that's not primarily what we're talking about. We're talking about the rise of sports betting as an industry, more of these things as an industry. And so we're going to give 5 reasons why we would encourage, especially if you come to our church, why we would encourage you not to participate in betting on sports or gambling. And all the reasons start with the letter I, so hopefully you can keep track. But the first one we'll just cover briefly, and especially it has a more local application, but gambling is illegal. I mean, you were doing some of the research on this, Pastor Johnny, but a lot of these major things in Idaho are not legal.
Right. It's interesting. For a while, it was federally illegal,
Yes.
except for Nevada and New Jersey. But through a court ruling, they returned it back to the states because there was this bias for those 2 states. But a lot of states just starting out, it's illegal to sports bet. It's illegal to engage in a lot of different types of gambling. So you think of Romans 12, you think of 1 Peter 2, if you're going to be a faithful Christian and submit to the government and submit to the authorities that God has placed over you, then the right thing to do is not engage in gambling and sports betting. I think you were even doing some research as well on that.
Yeah, Idaho is one of those states where it is illegal to sports bet online, illegal to gamble, except for at casinos on Native American soil, or at a horse race. There's an exclusion for that, or the Idaho lottery, because apparently Idaho thinks gambling's okay as long as the state wins.
Yeah. We'll get into some of the flaws of that, but I'm even thankful. I'm thankful that some of these things are not legal in our state. And I mean, you mentioned Romans 13, 1 Peter 2. I think a lot of Christians, especially the government is flawed in the world we live in. And so there's obviously a lot of things we go off and say, well, the government does this and it's not right. And I think some Christians are very quick to just brush off, Romans 13, 1 Peter 2. Yeah, but it's stupid. You don't just get to decide which things you think are good or bad and you get to follow them. Like, that's not how the Bible works. That's kind of not also how the Constitution works. You don't just get to ignore what you don't like. And some Christians, I think, are too cavalier on that front. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, just want to say, if you are participating in online gambling as a citizen of Idaho, you are breaking the law, and you need to know that and recognize that you are doing that as a citizen of this state if you are here in Idaho.
Yeah. So it's a good thing to know. And if I could just even say one of the reasons why I'm thankful that it's not legal in Idaho would be our second reason, which in my mind, this would be the biggest reason why I'd encourage you, no, don't bet on sports, don't participate in gambling at casinos and things like that, is because gambling is injurious. Gambling injures people. It hurts people. And one of the questions that always comes up in this conversation is, and the comparison people want to make are, well, there's risk if you put money in the stock market. And I think if that's what you think, I really want to invite you to use your brain for a couple minutes. I think that's pretty lazy thinking. And even it shows you think what's wrong with gambling is that there's risk involved.
Right.
That's not what's primarily wrong with gambling. Gambling inherently hurts people, or it doesn't work. And so let's just take the stock market versus gambling. If the stock market goes well, I mean, if you invest in a company and that company flourishes, a lot of people win. I mean, you win with a return on your investment. The company provides more jobs. Hopefully the company is providing a good or a service to people that people who are customers of the company, they're getting a benefit in exchange for what they say. Like, that's the whole point. That's why I'm a capitalist, because we don't just slice up the pie. We can make a bigger pie and everybody wins. For gambling to work, especially as an institution, a lot of people have to lose.
Right.
Or the whole thing, everybody can't win.
It's a zero-sum game. You're going to have a winner and a loser, and then there's always the house taking their cut as well.
Exactly.
So in the long run, everybody loses except the house.
Exactly. So it inherently, as an industry, hurts people. And that's where I would even say I think it's a somewhat predatory industry. It hurts most, I think, people that are impoverished and are desperate. That's even why I don't love states having lotteries, is it's not the wealthy people in the state that are participating in the lottery. It's the people that think maybe I can get lucky, and they're wasting what little resources they have on something that they have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than winning.
Well, and it's addictive too,
Yeah.
right? Even the gambling companies themselves, like, you see these ads and it's like, if you have a gambling problem, call so-and-so. It's like, there's something about this, oh, well, if I bet this and I lose money, well, then I've got to bet again to make it all up and make more. And it's a vicious cycle of just more and more betting and gambling, trying to make back money. And so you get addicted to it and you dig a huge pit for yourself.
Yeah. And starting a business, sure, there's risk in that, and it requires investment, and you may not get it back. But if it succeeds, hopefully your business is something that will then lead to a lot of people flourishing, where gambling is not like that. It will always be beating somebody down. And I think, just think of the broad picture of Scripture going all the way back to Genesis. We are made in the image of God to resemble and represent Him in the world, to exercise dominion. We want to see creation. We want to see humanity flourishing. And gambling as an industry is inherently opposed to human flourishing. That's probably the main argument I would make as to why Christians should avoid gambling. This is an inherently anti-humanity business. And so I think it's dangerous. Another thing we talked about, reason number 3, which a lot of these will then flow together now, is that gambling is irresponsible. Pastor Johnny, tell us more about why you think that is.
Yeah, so when you think about irresponsible, all of us as human beings, God has given us resources. He's entrusted to, all that we have is from Him. And so we are stewarding those resources. Even when we tithe or when we give, we're giving back to the Lord something He's given from us. So we're entrusted with this stewardship. And so I think, when we think about and being irresponsible, it's a poor stewardship of what God has given you. We even recently, with the college students, we're working through Matthew 25 and the parable of the talents. And we know that someday we'll all stand before the Lord and give an account for how we stewarded the talents that were entrusted to us. And so I don't think you can make the argument that it's a faithful stewardship of finances to gamble and bet, especially when it's injurious, like you were saying. I think of even 1 Timothy 5, where Paul is writing and saying that if someone does not provide for his own family, he's worse than an unbeliever. And so many of the risks involved with betting and gambling, where you're going to rack up debt and you're wasting a lot of your money, that's irresponsible. It's not a great way to provide for your family and look after them and provide for their needs. Even just thinking about how you can use those finances to advance kingdom work and give to the poor and needy. And just there's other better ways to steward those finances than sports betting where you're injurious, for example.
Yeah. And that's where with sports betting, like you said, it's growing in popularity because the floodgates have been opened through this court decision. As it is becoming more prominent, as you look around, you're seeing a lot more stories of ruined lives because of it. And especially there is a rise in how frequently you're hearing this story, particularly about young men. Mm-hmm. Young men who get caught up in this, and then it sucks you in further because it's like, okay, I'm a little behind, but all it takes is one good bet and I'm back in, baby. Like that's the mindset. And then you keep making that bigger bet to try to get back to it, and you just keep sinking in, and you read about young men that now have racked up thousands of dollars and maxed out credit cards in debt that is all gambling related.
Well, and that's how they get you. You see these initial ads where it's like your first bet is free, or here's this money and you can do these bets and you won't lose anything. Even if you lose the bet, it won't cost you anything for those first few. So it whets your appetite and you see the potential upside, and all of a sudden you're hooked, and then you're stuck in this vicious cycle.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up, what if somebody says, well, I'm going to do this responsibly. I'm going to budget X amount of money, because that budgeting, that's good stewardship. That's good responsibility. And so I'm just going to budget. And hey, some people spend their money, going out and playing golf. Some people go to the movies with their entertainment budget. I'm going to budget $25 a month for my entertainment budget for gambling. And if I lose it, okay, whatever, but I'm not going to exceed that. I'm being responsible. I mean, what would we say to that kind of thinking?
I think for one, you're now participating in a industry that is wicked and foolish at its core. So it's, there's other industries that we would agree are wicked and foolish at their core as well, that we want nothing to do with as believers. And so why would we then invest or spend any budget money on something that is just in every sense wicked or foolish? I mean, maybe you live somewhere besides Idaho and it's not illegal where you're at. Or maybe you're in some kind of betting, like the futures market or the poly markets that are not described legally as gambling.
Yeah.
And you like, I can do that. But again, it's just injurious all around. Nobody wins ultimately. Why put your money there? It's a bad use of stewardship.
Yeah.
Well, and I think even, you talked about budgeting the money, but I think when you get in the moment and your emotions start to get involved and you start to have the competitive spirit come out, or you lose sight of clear thinking. I mean, it's easy when you're outside of a sporting event to think, oh, I've got a level head, but then in the moment someone pushes your buttons or you get angry and all of a sudden you're yelling at a ref or something, you lose self-control, right? In sports betting or these other things, when you bet the money and you see things start to go really well and you start to see the dollar signs get larger, you're like, oh man, I could make even more. Mm-hmm. Or you see the money going down. It's like, oh man, I got to do something to make that back real quick. You start to make these impulse decisions that are guided by emotions and panic rather than clear level-headed thinking. So I think you're playing with fire by budgeting to have fun in that way. And I think it's just irresponsible.
Well, and I think in a lot of formats, and even this is where I think even if you get into some of the not so much an institution, but maybe it is a little more personal, there can be some peer pressure there where, okay, double or nothing, where there's just like, let's ramp up the stakes. And in those moments, it's hard to say no and stick to being responsible. I do think, that argument probably would have gone pretty far with an 18-year-old Ben Blakey thinking, oh yeah, $20, people can spend it on whatever. Sure. I'll enter a poker tournament for $20, and I think I'm smarter than most people, so maybe I've got a chance. And if I lose it, well, I entered the tournament, whatever. But that's where I think the older I get, the more you just see, no, this whole industry ruins lives. And that's where you might say, well, there's people that have ruined their lives in the stock market, and there can be greed in anything, mm-hmm. but the gambling industry, it's much more inherent. Mm-hmm. Like, can business be involved in greed, or greed be involved in business? Totally.
Yeah.
But it's not inherent. You can run a business without greed that leads to a lot of people flourishing. Gambling, there's no way it can lead to, across the board flourishing.
Well, it's constantly trying to get wealth, whether in small chunks or big chunks, hastily without doing any work. I mean, buying a scratcher's card for $2 at the grocery store, you're hoping to make $1,000 doing absolutely nothing. Proverbs 13:11 comes to mind. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Right? I mean, if you gain something quickly, you're not going to be responsible with it because you gained it irresponsibly.
Yeah.
When you've responsibly gained wealth, you're going to responsibly manage that wealth, and you're going to retain that wealth. And so it's unwise to try to quickly get money that's outside.
And that leads us from point number 3, gambling is irresponsible, to the fourth, that gambling is idleness, which is another word for laziness. And that's what you're pointing out there, Pastor Stephen, in that proverb of, and that's what, if you read through Proverbs, you see that the lazy person is always kind of, I got this get rich quick scheme and I can hit it big without a lot of work, where Proverbs shows the path to riches is diligence, hard work, good planning, and sure, there may be some risks along the way, but it's more based on those things instead of I'm just trying to find some scheme that really comes back to laziness instead of I'm really seeking to work hard.
And that's where you see the pivot, right? We've been talking a lot about where gambling itself, the institution, is wrong and corrupt for so many reasons. But now we're starting to get more at the heart, too, of like at a heart level for an individual, why is it wrong? Because there's a refusal to work hard in this get rich quick idea. I think of how should a Christian approach these thought processes, and I think a lot of Paul's writing in 2 Thessalonians 3, where he exhorts believers to work hard, work quietly to make a living, to provide for their own family, not to be busybodies, not to be idle, not to be lazy. And I think part of the appeal of sports betting and these other gamblings is that, I can get all this money and not have to work hard at all. And so you almost try to have the best of both worlds without any working hard. But really the marks of a Christian is someone who's quiet, works hard, and is not fascinated with these large sums of money, but just seeking to be faithful and seeking to provide for one's own family.
Yeah. Another verse that comes to mind, even as you were sharing that, is Ephesians 4:28, which says, "Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need." And that's where hard work leads to, I have more than I need to, and I can share with other people, where gambling, again, is inherently taking from people. I think we should highlight more the connection between gambling and stealing. The words of my pastor when I was a young man that spoke a lot to me, and I don't know if he came up with this or got it somewhere else, but it was an analogy that gambling is to stealing what dueling is to murder. People say, well, we agreed to it. Okay, well, are we going to go back to dueling? Like, hey, you just killed that guy. Well, he agreed to the duel. That there's a bigger connection there with gambling and stealing than I think we want to admit, just because, somebody else agreed to it. And that's where I think at a personal level, if I'm betting $100 against you against golf, that'd be foolish because you're going to beat me. But also, like, we're just agreeing to steal from each other at that level. Versus, I think one of the dangers of sports betting is it dehumanizes all of that, because I don't see the people that I'm taking the money from when I'm just doing it from an app on my phone. Someone out there is losing. Like, if I'm having a good night, someone out there is having a bad night. And I don't see that because now it's all online. Right. And that's where you see it shows it's the lazy person, it's the thief. We want to be people that I work hard, not just to meet my own needs, but I work hard so that I can share with others. And that would be a more responsible use of my money is, hey, if I have excess money that I could spend gambling, how can I maybe be sharing that with somebody else?
Right. Just to add in here, there's other things that don't go under the term gambling. I mentioned the poly market and futures trading. These things, like, they're technically legal here in Idaho and across the nation. But really, those are just gambling because it's the same concept. Like you're putting money on some event in the future or something happening, and some people are going to win, some people are going to lose. So if you're even out there thinking, well, it's not called gambling, it's something different. It's really the heart behind it. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Where you're putting your money. I mean, one thing I heard is that back at Thanksgiving, there was a bet based on whether Trump would use the word stuffing in his Thanksgiving speech, or there was at the most recent Super Bowl, there was a poly market wager basically on whether Mark Wahlberg would go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And $23 million was exchanged over whether Mark Wahlberg went to the Super Bowl. Not the Super Bowl, but whether Mark Wahlberg went to the Super Bowl. And it's like, okay, that's not gambling in the terminology, but in every other sense, it's gambling. So even while you can legally do that here in Idaho, it's still idleness and a wickedness and a quick get-rich-quick scheme.
And even I think you really got to examine your own heart or the effects of certain kinds of trading, even in financial markets, where, like I said, don't be lazy in your thinking when it comes to the stock market. The stock market and gambling are very much not the same thing, but that does not mean that all kinds of trading that go on with the stock market are equal. Mm-hmm. Again, we want to do things that will lead to human flourishing, and there's kinds of, it would be under the term investment, and you can find people on Wall Street that do this, but it's very speculative, it's very risky, and it is more of a zero-sum game where I'm winning, somebody's losing, and I think those are the kinds of investments that I think we should stay away from, and the kinds of investments we should pursue are, hey, I'm investing in this, and sure, I'm hoping for a good return, but if this goes well, a lot of people are going to win, not just me, I think is a better Christian way to think about investment, because you could go about investment in a way that is having a mindset very similar to gambling, which wouldn't be the right way to go about it. It'd be an idle way.
Right. I think Proverbs 28 even sums this up well in verses 19 and 20. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished.
Mm-hmm. And that is a good segue to our final point here, that gambling is idolatrous. Mm-hmm. And I think of 2 Timothy 3, which describes what people will be like in the last days, and a couple of them, lovers of money, lovers of self, lovers of pleasure. And that, I think, is what drives a lot of this. I love money, I love pleasure, and that's why I do this. And I think we started this whole podcast with the fact that we like sports. Even betting aside, there's a lot of idolatry that comes along with sports. I mean, that for a lot of people, their favorite sports team, that is their worship.
Right.
And that's where they go to worship. That's who they give to, they tithe, all of that. Like, that is their worship. That is their religion. And it's sad. I mean, you see this in American sports. You see this with sports around the world, people that wrap up their lives in it. And so even take the money out of it, sports can't, I think there's some inherently good things about sports, and I think there's a place for Christian involvement in sports and even just fun in good, clean competition. But it can easily be an idol, and that's where I think when we add money to that, it just supercharges it even more and can suck people into this is my life even more. And that's where I'd say it's also, but good, clean sports, I think it can be a godly thing and a good thing in God's created world. Gambling also always corrupts sports.
Yeah, sports betting is just taking two gods and putting them together. Right?
Yeah.
Money is one functional god and sports is the other, and now you've got them both.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one way you can tell if you love money or not is in Ecclesiastes 5:10 we read, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income." If you're constantly needing or wanting more money and you're willing to gamble for it, then you have a love of money problem.
Yeah.
You have a heart that is worshiping money. And people who are rich do different things to get more money, and people who are poor often go to gambling to get more money because it's a way that they can engage in with a few dollars here and there to try to make hundreds, and it just shows that they have a love of money problem. The antidote to that is in Hebrews 13:5, which says, "Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you."
Yeah.
If you believe that God is sovereign over all things, then he is sovereign with where he's put you in life at this point, and his call to you is to be content with that and work hard, right? Labor for your money, earn it the responsible way, and don't take the shortcut to try to get money quick.
Well, speaking of contentment, Paul talks about that too in 1 Timothy 6. He says in verse 6, "But godliness with contentment is great gain.
Mm-hmm.
For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing with these, we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction." I mean, that sounds like gambling and sports betting played out in so many people's lives.
Yeah.
And then he says this in verse 10, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." And so I think that warning from the Apostle Paul is really helpful for us as Christians to stay away from things like this, because it leads to all types of pain, and it's a snare and temptation, and rather we should be content. If we have food and clothing, that's enough for us.
Yeah.
We're content in the Lord, and we'll just continue in faithfulness.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for sharing these points. And even just if you're watching this and you're actively engaging in sports betting or something like that, or maybe you're a young man and you're thinking thoughts that maybe I would have thought at some point, well, it's just a little fun, or, I'm being responsible, I'm not hurting anybody. I'd encourage you really give some thought to these arguments and see, you might not think you're hurting anybody. You might not see that, but this whole industry is built upon hurting people. And I think it's going to have bad effects in our society the more prevalent it becomes. And I think it's something as Christians that we should be staying away from. And I hope you give some thoughts to these arguments. As always, you can find more resources from our church at compassbible.tv or revivalfromthebible.com. Until next time, may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you.